Good morning, everyone. This is the last day of our public hearings, department public hearings scheduled, and we have the IT department, audit department, and a presentation from the mayor's office scheduled for this morning. We also have in the afternoon scheduled for what we call overflow time, and based on some previous commitments and schedules, and our time commitments today, we thought that might be best conducted. The overflow time will be on next Monday at the conclusion of the Ways and Means regular committee meeting. So that date is on November 10th, when we'll be addressing the framework for the budget process going forward, as well as any follow-up questions that the council members or departments have to share with that since their previous presentations. So I think we can begin today, if it's all right with folks, as we're joined today this morning by Councilmember Palmisano, Council Vice President Glidden, Council Members Warsami and Johnson. And quorum is not needed, but we certainly have one. So you can go ahead and begin if you'd like. Mr. Dahl.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Quincy and members of committee. I'd like to start this morning in talking about the IT organization from a personnel standpoint. We have 66 positions within IT. We spend 23% of our budget on salary and benefits. We have fairly flat organization, and we support all aspects of information technology, computing, network, and otherwise. And I'll get into the details of how we go about this and how we organize ourselves into 4 programs. For those of you who have seen us before, who have been through this process, will notice that we have changed our programmatic structure from past years. And I wanted to drive the organization to more of a, what's our intent, what are we trying to accomplish view. And so rather than looking at things more from a technology standpoint, but to look at what are we really trying to accomplish beyond maintaining, if you will, some IT infrastructure. But also there are 3 other areas in decision support, services empowerment, workforce empowerment, orientation, as well as civic enablement. And so I'll go through those each here shortly. The overall budget for the organization is outlined in those 4 areas on page 4. And as you can see, the vast majority of our dollars is spent in the infrastructure side. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure, whether that's a device on your desktop or what you have before you today, in chambers, to the network that you ride to get out to the internet and communicate with others, etc. You'll notice, even though that has the most dollars, it really doesn't have a lot of FTE associated with it because we outsource a fair amount of that infrastructure management through managed services contract, primarily with Unisys, but also we make use of some other vendors, and we also have an association, for instance, with USI Wireless for the wireless network within the city. So that's why you see that dynamic. Our people power as far as city employees is really tied up in empowering the workforce and doing decision support services. So the first area I'd like to talk about is civic enablement services, and this is not something that maybe one sees traditionally in an IT organization, but when I got here in 2011, it was brought to my attention, and it most definitely made perfect sense that it was important for the city to promote, and in those days we called it reducing the digital divide. I really think it's an equity issue, and so I've recast it as a digital equity gap. that we're really trying to reduce. And we really feel that there are three things we need to do to accomplish that. One is that people obviously need access to the internet. They need computing of some sort, whether that's a PC or a tablet, smartphones these days, etc. They also have to be digitally literate. They have to feel comfortable with the technology. They have to know how to use it to their advantage. And they also have to see a value proposition. Because if they don't see the value proposition, then this is coming out of discretionary dollars, they're going to spend those dollars elsewhere. And we actually see that in our survey data, and I'll be showing you some of that here shortly. There's also another area that we want to get into, and that is dealing with an opportunity equity gap, because we really feel that the IT field, the IT industry is a very strong industry. It employs a lot of folks. But we have a disproportionate lack of people of color and women in the field, and we'd like to promote a change in that. And so there's going to be some orientations that we'll be taking in order to hopefully improve people seeing not only making use of technology, but potentially actually being in the field in some fashion. And obviously there's a secondary motive. The more folks we have available, this is a very tight IT market in the way of when it comes to hiring. Lots of people looking for not enough talent. And so we really want to increase the talent, IT talent, in the Twin Cities area. We also want to tackle in the out years, and we're going to be working on strategy in 2015 for helping the city to prepare technically for growth. We are integrating technology more and more into our society, and there are some initiatives for the city to grow, and I want to make sure that the use of and the application of technology where appropriate keeps pace and allows for that growth to continue. We most definitely want to ensure that we have a strong digital infrastructure around the city, that we have a digitally literate workforce in all aspects of business in Minneapolis, and then ultimately make just have a friendly business environment for those who want to pursue careers and/or businesses in the high-tech industry. And then finally, we really want to focus on allowing people to see how they can leverage technology to grow their business, grow themselves, that we have a much richer dialogue and collaboration capability between not only government and our residents, but government and our business community as well as ultimately ensuring that we don't leave anybody out. And so this kind of goes hand in hand with digital equity gap that we're trying to address, all the way to ensuring that we don't forget about folks who have disabilities and other sorts of restrictions as well. When you look at, and we do a survey each year of the digital equity landscape, and it's interesting, we are improving seemingly a little bit each year. When you look at households completely without any aspect of internet access, smartphone or otherwise, we've improved. We were at 11% in 2013. When we did the survey at the beginning of this year, that had dropped to 9%. But we also have a number of folks who only have internet through a smartphone, which for some aspects is usable, but I sure wouldn't want to be trying to knock out my resume and do some other things sitting on a smartphone, regardless of how big they've gotten so far. And so, one thing for sure, you can see in that upper left-hand diagram, the city, you can see the disparities, you can see the gaps by area of the city, by community, and those, again, might be contracting a little bit, but they're most definitely stark from one community to another. In the lower left, what we're trying to show there is the fact that there are a number of public PCs available, whether that's the public libraries, the park system has some, there's a lot of community technology centers out there. Unfortunately, the hours that they're available, the number of machines that they don't dedicate to things like training, et cetera, drive, you know, a factoid that we really, per se, don't like much. And that is, if we were to take the just under 25,000 households who either have no internet access at all or only can get it through a smartphone, if we were to try to spread them across the PCs that are available when they're available, we could only give each household 100 minutes a week. And I don't know about you, but I most definitely would be hard-pressed as a family unit to sort of live off of 100 minutes of time on the internet. And then to the right there, we asked people what they're very comfortable with. And I would point you at three things there. You know, we use this to try to educate those entities within the city who are trying to increase the digital literacy of the population. And, you know, don't get me wrong, there is somebody that could learn how to use email, but that's a shrinking population. But three things that really kind of strike us on that chart: job hunting online. Yes, we're past the 50% mark. It is going up, but that hasn't even reached 60%. And more jobs, the only way you can get them is to go online. And so we really think that, again, that's something we are trying to promote. Protecting your computer. People do not feel comfortable. They don't feel safe. And as we all know, if you don't feel safe out on the street, you take certain actions. And you may not go down a street. It's the same thing with the web, with the internet. If you don't feel safe out there, there's things you won't do, or you may not even go there to begin with. And so we really think that that is, you know, we've got to make people more comfortable that they have done what's necessary to keep them safe when they're online. And then finally, troubleshooting. We all like to feel that we can do sort of that first level troubleshooting. I think people really feel that it's a black box and that there really are things that they could learn. So most definitely, we really feel there's a lot of opportunity in the city. And finally, when you look at the internet activities that people engage in, and you know, things like communicating, getting caught up on news and the weather, et cetera, is obviously very high. I'll point out a couple of things that kind of strike us. Even though it's increasing, working from home is right around in the 55% range. That's quite a bit, but most definitely a lot of people have touted how everyone's going to be working from home, and that's most definitely not the case. And then sort of the last item and the two up from it, engaging in civic activities and communicating with government. Communicating with government is going down, and that's an extremely large percentage of folks who just don't converse with us, most definitely not online. And really engaging in civic activities is kind of surprising to us as well. So again, we kind of watch these statistics and use them to help the more than 90 organizations that are attempting to do something with the digital equity gap within the city.
Thank you, Mr. Dow. I just wanted to interrupt. You're still working on the civic enablement?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll let you continue. Sorry.
And then finally, one of the things that we look at, we measure how many people come to the city's web presence, and it's kind of stuck bouncing around 3 to 4 million visits. You know, page views, yeah, you expect once people come here, they go places. But we really would like to feel that we can make ourselves even more relevant and more of a destination to that. Now, civic enablement services, there is no enhancement in this area for 2015. And of course, we really feel that you know, our focus is on the One Minneapolis and economic activity and innovation goals, and you can see there the values in equity and growth. So switching to the next area.
But before you do that,
Yes.
let me just see if we can follow up a little bit more with the civic enablement. You notice there's, obviously, you just mentioned that there's no enhancement to that. There's a current non-general fund of $218,000. And the problem is, for me anyway, as we look at the budget, what's the role of the IT department? Is it to, support the city enterprise, or is it to get residents and visitors enabled to communicate with government, as you just outlined? That's really what we're talking about here, isn't it? It's, the core services are still with the city, but to make it easier for neighborhoods, for residents, for organizations to connect and to communicate with the city is what really this $218,000 in the budget is supposed to be doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chairman, question. Yes. I mean, we're a facilitator.
Right.
We're an organizer, a coordinator of other people's activities. There are some things that we do a little bit directly, because I do have some staff through organizations like CTEP, some temporary staff that we have made use of to help in those efforts. But yes, we are a coordinator, and our perch is a good place to do that, because obviously we're able to see across the entire city. A lot of times just connecting one nonprofit organization with another in another part of the city, they didn't know what each other was doing, and then there's collaboration and better things happen because of that.
Sure. And that I was thinking more of everything from Meet Minneapolis to 311, as well as the county and the library system, as well as the park board, and what's going on in the park buildings. This is all something that the city and the IT department can have a role in. This is the top level kind of opportunity, whether it's with the U.S. wireless contact, or whether we're talking about all the things we're doing with OpenGov. This is what IT does. It helps provide the framework and the tools that allows us to communicate with people. So, thank you. Let you continue.
Now, in decision support, any organization.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize, Councilmember Gordon. We are using speaker management, and I missed that. So thank you for that. Councilmember Gordon had a question.
Yeah, this is a question about the funding, the $218,838 for this. Is that funding that we got as part of our negotiations with the USI wireless contract, and is that funding set to end soon, or where does that funding come from, and how stable is it for future years?
Sure. Chair Quincy, Councilmember Gordon, what you speak of is our USI wireless contract. We get a percentage of their profits each year, and that gets funneled to a digital fund that is managed outside of the city. And so those dollars, as a matter of fact, we just received a check for the last fiscal year just the other week, I think 2 weeks ago, from USIW. And so we use that money through that group, and there's a group established, and for a while there they were running this grant program where they would have people submit proposals from around the city, and then they would grant monies out of that initial thing. We had worked that pot down to practically nothing, and so we've been waiting here until it builds itself back up before we go and work through that money. So, but that money is separate and is not the $218,000. What I've done in order to do that, that's really primarily staff time, and I've taken an individual. Elise Abhart is our digital equity person, and so it's really funding her and a few ancillary items.
And that, so there's a follow-up question, but also it says non-general fund, and so where does the fund come from if it's not from the general fund to pay for the digital divide person? And then I'm also curious, since you talked about a check that we got, how much that was for, if you happen to know. Sure. for the other separate fund.
Yeah. Chair Quincy, Councilmember Gordon, I believe the check was for somewhere around $13,000, $14,000. I'd have to go double check, but That's, my memory has it there. And oh, now I forgot your first question.
The source of the non-general funds to
Oh,
pay
okay.
for the civic engagement services.
The way things are done, as you know, we have a rate model that we structure for the city, and we get primarily our funding ultimately from the general fund, but there are also other funds that come into effect and apply to paying for our rate structure. So that money actually comes out of that ultimately through that rate structure. And my understanding is the dollars for that is coming, has been identified not to have come from the general fund, but from other funding sources.
So when we say non-general fund, that's all the rate? Because I notice a lot of things are actually non-general fund. So it sounds like that's all from the sort of internal financial shifts through this rate model, which I would say a lot of our departments get those monies originally from property taxes, sort of from the general fund. They go to our departments, then we have them, and then we transfer them to you as part of the rate model. But maybe, I mean, that's a simplistic way to view it, but that's just the way I view these things because it helps me understand.
Councilmember Gordon. Yeah, our understanding is 78% of the dollars that come our way have been identified to have come from the general fund, and the remainder has come from other sources.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Gordon. Ms. Christensen, did you have any information on the USI Wireless financial arrangement that?
Chair Quincy, the comment I wanted to make was pertaining to agreement with Councilmember Gordon regarding the genesis of the funds that eventually make their way into the Intergovernmental Services Internal Service Fund, which is really the funding source for the information technology. The original funding, about 78% of the resources are originated in the general fund through the charges, internal service charges to the user departments. So, and I believe Mr. Dahl alluded to the 78%.
Good. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to go to the next section. Thank you.
The second program we have is trying to help people, any workforce, make decisions. Our ability to manage our data, to give tools to help people, whether it's through reporting, some business intelligence analytics, or other facilities that allow people to ultimately learn from, seek knowledge, and ultimately inform them in their decision making. And so this is a specific area that has gotten more attention over the years. If you read and see, quote, big data as a term in the industry or in the news, that's a part of this world. And so for 2015, we are not seeking any enhancements in this arena. One of the, you know, we're seeking better measurements, but one of the measurements that we make use of is the city has been investing and continues to invest in a enterprise-wide content management system. You know, our switch over the years from a paper-based operation to more online has required us to use technologies like document imaging and what have you to ensure that we get, if you will, digitize our world. And so what we look for is to see that shift going on in the city because obviously we can't take advantage of the automation that's available in the industry relative to helping us with decision making if we don't turn our data into a digitized form. And so this slide is showing you that you know, we're making some progress, but we really want to try to accelerate this because again, the more data that we can have electronically in a form that's usable, really will play into the strengths of the tool sets that we've built. And I'll be talking a little bit later about how we've structured those tools to help the city with its decision making.
Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this chart. And so this reflects a desire to have more information that is funneled through a software system that helps manage the data, or is it reflecting something? I just want to make sure I'm understanding what's, because you have on one axis the number of content items in millions, and then the other one just kind of shows the time progression. So,
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember.
and is that all? I guess the other part to the question before you answer is this something that you see is all within IT's budget, or is this something where you're reflecting the enterprise, not just what's in IT's budget?
Right. This represents the number of documents that we've moved from paper to electronic form in various ways. And so, again, we're coming from a paper-based society, and so this is what it's tracking. This is all within IT's budget and is just a general service available across the city. There's no additional cost. Most of this funding has come through the CLIC process over the years. When we put this lens of goals and values on this, obviously it's primarily in a city that works goal, but we really feel because of the heavy use by public safety and health and other organizations in that area, as well as CPED, et cetera, you start to see the connections of their decision-making often is really in need of and makes use of information and data. So it's really, the ties are much stronger there than just strictly this is something to help us work better, which of course it is.
Right. Getting back to the overall theme is you're helping enable these departments to perform their duties. You talk about CPED, whether it's mapping or zoning maps, anything like that. The tool is the technology, and you're just providing the access to the departments to make those good decision support programs.
Yes, Chairman Quincy, correct. And unfortunately, there's a lot of technical things that have to happen in order to do that. And so I think we get caught up in today's attitude of there's an app for that, but you got to build that app and you have to manage your data structures, et cetera. And so that's what we do on behalf of the departments. I'd like to move into a third area, and this is most definitely where we spend the majority of our money. 63% of the IT spend is within infrastructure services. Obviously, this is where we're maintaining things that people typically recognize, whether it's a physical device, whether it's those wires in the wall, or that wireless connection, our ability to get to the internet, et cetera. And so you see the various, whether it's parts of the IT industry that we have to deal with, the networking companies, managed services, whether or not we're actually using services in what's these days known as the cloud, or we're using someone else's equipment for a very specific purpose. If you will, software as a service is the way we term it, but basically there's a movement afoot in the world to provide certain capabilities strictly elsewhere. And so our ability to integrate all this to ensure that things work, that we have access to our information, that we have survivability of that information, et cetera, falls on the IT organization to ensure that is all functioning and in the best interest of the city. There are some enhancements in this area. The two on the bottom, we're like any organization. There's times where we want to add to our tool set that we make use of by the IT staff. And also we have to keep up our web infrastructure, particularly in anticipation, as I mentioned, of our drive to improve people's use of that presence. And we also have dollars in there for transition costs for the managed services, i.e. the outsourcing, IT outsourcing contract that we're currently in process right now, and I'll talk about that in a moment. All of these are done through the CARS process that's done through finance, and so that's how we've structured seeking these dollars. The next couple of pages deal with how our infrastructure is supported. Obviously, we look at whether or not our providers are serving us properly, meeting their service level agreements. And so you can see, by and large, we do fairly well. We've had some bumps in the road, but 2014 is seems to be coming along even better than 2013. So one thing I would point out in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, the number of projects has picked up across the city. We had sunk to a low of 62. I really believe that was the impact of the recession. And so things slowed down from an IT standpoint, but they have steadily increased, and we do not see that slowing down any. And then finally, we also, this is our service desk and desk side services, and we had some challenges in late 2013, which we have since corrected, and we look much better through 2014 so far. And then finally, of course, this is really primarily in a city that works. I just want people to recognize, you know, IT as an infrastructure. It's just like having roads and sidewalks and a water system, et cetera. You all have an electronic highway and the devices on it. And so that's what we try to manage. The next program area for us is we really feel that one focus we need to have is on empowering the workforce. It's one thing to have all these great technologies, but if people don't know how to use it, if they're not actually making use of it, then you really should maybe be questioning your investment in things. We want folks to be as efficient and effective as possible, and we believe technology has a big role in that. This is our second largest spend. We spend approximately 29% of the IT budget in this world. And this is not only just dealing with technology, providing capabilities like web conferencing or you know, something as just as straightforward as email. There's lots of capabilities we provide. One area that I think people maybe don't recognize, but our ability to manage projects, to manage technology projects requires us to have project managers, just like departments need project managers on their work. And so we work in concert with departments to formulate a project management team to ensure that what we do on any project, any initiative gets done well and efficiently and as cost effectively as possible. And to me, it's extremely important that we're very efficient and effective in project management. There's a tremendous amount of hype in this industry, and we always have to make sure that we're grounded and that we ensure that we truly are getting our just rewards for whatever our investments are that we make in IT. There are no enhancements in this area being sought in 2015. One of the things we do watch and what I am usually concerned with is our ability to react to what departments may need. Invariably, it's very hard for folks to estimate or project what they may need. And so our ability to ensure that we have some flexibility beyond just being able to, if you will, keep the lights on, doing maintenance, et cetera, is important. And so this is something that we track. I would like to have this improved somewhat, but it is something that is of concern to us because we don't want to get into a mode where, regardless of situation, that we can't move without some direct adjustment to budget on a moment's notice. I point this out because you've probably, for those of you who have been here, you've seen this traffic light graph. The information systems that the city uses, and we have over 450 systems of record that are used across the city government. Things get out of date. They get beyond their useful life. We have, unfortunately, sometimes a bad habit of allowing things to elapse. It's kind of like, you know, you have that old jalopy car and you allow it to run, and one day it doesn't want to run. And so what we look at is what's the useful life of technology, which varies depending on what type of technology it is. And then we start to get into action when we're like 3 years out from its useful life, and trying to organize through departments to have the funding and the time to ensure that we can refresh, upgrade, consolidate, et cetera. And you've seen this in many different ways. For instance, land management, the enterprise land management system is a perfect example. There are many, many systems that are red in that world, and they're going to go green. We are going to get some consolidation out of some of our systems. We're like a lot of things. Once a system gets established and put in use, we don't often get rid of things. We just enhance them and evolve them over time as the business of government evolves. But we've made significant progress, I believe, over the years, even though we still have work to do. But this is, you know, the city workforce, the city departments, the city government at large, this is the infrastructure that you're writing, and we want it to be stable. We want it to be able to handle anything new that might come up in industry, et cetera. I'll point out one last thing on this. Infrastructure services at the very bottom. I have some very high goals down there, and the reason for that is that's the foundation of all your IT. Those are your network connections and so forth. If the network isn't there, it makes no difference what record system you're trying to get to, et cetera. And so some of these actually do have more importance than others. And so, you know, that's why we seek to ensure that those systems are more up to date more often. And then finally, this is our orientation of where we feel we have the most impact on goals and values. There are 3 areas I just want to touch on that I feel as projects and initiatives within the department that we've been working on and that we're quite proud of. One deals in the world of digital equity. There's an awful lot that we've accomplished in the course of the last few years. And we're trying to leverage what we've learned through these efforts and try to position ourselves to somehow ramp up and to accomplish things for a lot more of our residents, a lot more of our households across the city. And so I point you at the bottom left corner because I'll use that as an example. You know, a few years ago, we started with 10 families in a partnership with Build Wealth to piece together a program that allowed us to take 10 families, give them devices that we received from PCs for People, which is an organization that refurbishes PCs, which, by the way, we send when we refresh our desktop and laptop devices, we send them the PCs for People, and then they see that those devices come back into Minneapolis. And so we took 10 of those devices, we gave those to 10 families that were in the Build Wealth program. We then gave them extensive training to get their digital literacy up. We gave them tech support on top of that. We gave them access to the internet. Also Build Wealth then provided financial management education and training, because ultimately we know for things to be survivable, people have to get to a certain income in order to support technology in the future. Because we were just there for a year to roll this out. We have since moved that up to, we handled 40 families this year, and we'd really like to increase that. And so we have eyes on trying to ramp this up to 1,000 households. I put in the chart there to give you a sense of the dollars it takes to do these sorts of things. But again, we really feel that we have to kind of tackle those three areas I talked about earlier, where we're in a position to not only give people the means, but give them the knowledge to take advantage, to leverage technology, as well as this overarching understanding of what will it buy them. What value proposition should they be considering as they make decisions in their lives as to where to spend their money? And so this is something that we're really striving to somehow see how we can ramp this up. And so we're out looking for funding and grants and other sorts of things to try to get to those levels. I had mentioned when I was talking about decision support that we as an organization for the city have been trying to help the city with its information, because it's really key to what a lot of workers need to do their jobs. Up there at the top, you know, as I mentioned, we have 450 systems of record, and they all have data that they operate on. And at a very high level, when I first came here, we had all these systems, and some of them were interrelated a little, but basically they were all kind of independent. And a lot of what we heard was one department didn't understand what another department had. And sometimes the data, when you tried to figure out what was happening on a block or in a specific address, data seemed to point at different places. And so we recognized we had a data management challenge before us. And so we've been attempting to go through and tackle this issue of, number one, we wanted to, through some master data management capabilities, to set up some governance and to, you know, catalog our information, make sure that it's widely understood across the organization of city government so that all departments understand what is available. We then turn around and build filters there for enterprise addressing to ensure that when people say it's at Otto's house, that every part of the city has the same address for Otto. It may seem that that's counterintuitive, but we've had challenges there. Addressing is, as some of my staff have told me, a nightmare. And so we've built a master addressing scheme that now we're ensuring that our systems get hooked into so that we guarantee that everybody, if you will, points to the right place, to the same place. This also has a side arena of asset management and inventory, where we're trying to ensure that all our assets are accurately identified and, again, digitized so that we understand what we have, where it is, and various characteristics of it. And then moving to the fourth area, data quality. Now, we would all like to think that all our data is absolutely clean and accurate. And over time, based on past decisions or whatever, we've run into instances where the data isn't as complete, maybe has some discrepancies in it, or just literally is put in a form that is not very usable at all. And so data quality, just like anything else, the tools that we have, and we do have a lot of good tools in decision support and in empowering the workforce that the workforce uses, but bad data will make for bad information, bad results, and ultimately potentially bad decisions. And so we really think that that is very important, and we're working to ensure that our processes ultimately generate the cleanest data possible, the most complete data, et cetera. Because ultimately what we get at the end, hopefully, is an enterprise data source that has the information necessary for workers to do their best. And you can see the whole set of technologies that we make use of. Some of those are facing the public, i.e. the public has access to things. We're going to be releasing our data portal next month for open data, and enhancing further things in Map at Minneapolis, for instance, which is a mapping facility for putting cities' data in context for the public, et cetera. And of course, we do a lot of things through the web as well. And so it's very important because it's not only now things for our own staff, but also for the public at large. All right? And so there is rhyme or reason to the dollars that you give us in this area.
Council Vice President Glidden, please.
Thanks. I kind of wanted to make sure I'm understanding what all's we're seeing here. I think this is just a hugely important part of what we need a good handle on in the city. We have a lot of data, growing data, and it's unclear sometimes to understand how the management is facilitated. And I guess what you are letting us know is there's you talk about governance here. So is there some multi-department governance team that helps make recommendations on data management? Or is this a part of a vision?
Yeah, Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, there are pieces of it in place. For instance, we have data coordinators that we established with the open data world. There is another committee that we have done at the working level across all the departments, where we both talk about people's needs in the department relative to information and data, as well as educate them on the technologies that have been put in place. That liaison group is how we primarily use through it. What we are going to be coming out and proposing some further governance higher up, so that we can start to establish more from a policy level what we want to do. We're starting to get into the issue of what is sufficient quality of information. And
okay, so
those things, we have not established that structure yet.
Okay. Well, I guess number one, I'll say I'm happy to hear that there is discussion about what's the right structure around the data and what pieces of the data. I guess I'm not clear here too what all data management encompasses within the, because there's retention issues. It's just big. A lot of policy issues with different types of data. And I notice in your examples here, you've got stuff that is, for example, police department specific data, which I'm imagining maybe involves different considerations than some other data, just depending on what that data is. But again, I guess I will just say on my part, I think we sorely need a more enterprise the type of governance structure to, and so I'm glad the city coordinator's here as well, because I think that's what the coordinator does, is help manage the multiple enterprise needs of our organization, and having more consistency around how we do our checks and balances around all the aspects of data, from retention to policy development to privacy to security. All these elements, I'll just say, all have great potential for legal issues, for breach of the enterprise in terms of access to the data. I mean, just so many issues. So anyway, happy to hear that a more enterprise-facing governance structure is in the works, and I hope that comes to fruition.
And then finally, the third area I wanted to talk about was the outsourcing RFP. We've been on this journey for some time. We are currently in contract negotiations with the finalists, and we hope to get into a position where we can settle on, if you will, a winning strategy here towards the end of this month, and then we can get down to finally structuring a final contract and go through the contracting process and be in a position early next year to start whatever transitions need to be done. And so that's where we sit right now in the outsourcing RFP. Wanted to just give you a little bit of a focus of sort of what we've kind of learned. We have seen that it was a really good idea to go out on the street. If anything, we are going to save a fair amount of money based on the proposals that we got back and that we've been working on through negotiations. We have found that when we looked at the various proposals, and we started with 18 of them, that there was a lot of variance. There were a lot of different approaches that people brought to us, which was good. But when you start to turn around and see how they fit or not within city government, not everything was lining up well. Some things more than others. We also thought that we had network as an area, and we felt that we should handle that separately outside of this. And so we will address that opportunity in early 2015. And then finally, one of the areas that we were really interested in was our interaction with city workers, with the departments directly, is really important. And we wanted to change the orientation that we've had from sort of this break fix, how do I get something, or how do I get something fixed, to being much more proactive and flexible, because our workforce is evolving. It is changing. They're coming with more of a technology bent. They are seeing the value of technology, and they are looking for us and wanting to and asking us more, what can solve this problem, or what can help me do this? And we want to be in a position to be more capable of showing people, based on what they're trying to accomplish, what outcome they're trying to achieve, and get technologies to leverage in essence, their success in achieving whatever they're trying to achieve. And so we were fairly disappointed in what the industry at large seemed to really be focused in on, which was that break fix. Not that that isn't important and it has to happen, but it's this interaction with folks. And the best analogy I can show you, think about how people deal with smartphones and apps, all right? There's an app for this, or there's an app for that. And they're not as, the device itself, they know even less about the device as compared to 20 years ago and what people ended up learning and understanding about a PC and the ins and the outs. That's just the shell. What's important is the actual application, the outcome. Does it give me what the latest weather is, or my flight times, or whatever the case may be? It's those sorts of results that people really are concentrating on. Yet it's being delivered through a technology package, right? And there's all sorts of complexity behind that. And that's why you have an IT department, to make sure that that complexity stays underneath the surface and that people concentrate on how do I leverage, how do I deploy technologies where appropriate. And I'm one to try to ensure that my organization sees to it that we're just not doing technology for technology's sake. Sometimes the best answer is not to deploy technology. But where it is, then we want to ensure that we do that and we do it effectively for folks, and that it can be consumed and used by others within city governments, so we get economies of scale, et cetera. And so that's really the focus that we were looking for, and that we didn't see really a lot of out there in the industry. As I mentioned, we plan on finalizing the contract, getting it signed early next year so that we can begin the transition. The current Unisys contract ends at the end of 2015, and so that's our timeline for accomplishing this. And we're currently planning to take on and deal with that client computing interface, the service desk, the desk side support that's going to take place as well. And so that's really what we're up to in this area. Has consumed a tremendous amount of our effort, but well worth it. This is just a recap of the CARS program, and we've been through all this. Capital requests, there's really sort of a perennial one for our modernization of things that are not handled by our chief managed services contract, i.e. the Unisys contract. We have enterprise infrastructure modernization account, and we're seeking $850,000 again for that. We also are helping police move from an antiquated, past its useful life, records management system for police data. And so that is also being sought this year for $2 million. This is comparison between 2014 and 15. Unless somebody has some questions.
I don't think there are any questions at this point. I'd like to thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a late arrival or two.
I think these are some standard highlights of the whole thing, Jim.
We're going to go to Councilmember Palmisano and then Councilmember Yang. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dahl, I'm unclear on the page with the table of operating capital requests. What is the total cost of transition going to be? I see the 2.7 in next year's budget, but it also looks like that might not be complete, and there's an annual operating cost to that. I don't understand.
Okay. Chair Quincy, Councilmember Palmisano, when we had to go and structure, our budget for 2015 was before we knew what was what the proposals when we went out to the RFP process were going to come back with. So we put in a number, and that's what that $2.7 million is. Obviously, through negotiations and so forth, we will land on a transition cost. So that's kind of more of a placeholder for what we ultimately would have to pay for transition costs for the IT outsourcing managed services. The annual operating cost is 210. All right. Sorry, I had to be reminded. We do have some operating costs that we're going to incur as an organization based on the outsourcing transition. And so that's why the $210,000 is in there for us to manage a new set of suppliers.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dahl, so then is it fair to say that the total cost of transition will be around $3 million?
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Palmisano, it's gonna be more than that. At this point, I can't tell you exactly because we're still in the negotiations, but it will be more than that. It most definitely won't be less than this, but it will be more.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in. Obviously, we're in negotiations, so it's impossible to project what a cost would be. I think we really need to focus on the annual operating, and that's really going to be covered, I think, is in the reduction of the contract amount in the long term. So on an annual basis versus a long-term view is how probably finance and IT are working together to make sure that there's enough resources to cover those gaps.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dahl, I'm trying to understand these terms. If you can help me out here, the outsourcing transition, does that mean essentially that we're trying to bring some stuff in-house? Is that kind of the concept?
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Yang, actually it's a combination. If you change suppliers, for instance, our computers that we run on, what we call servers, they're housed in a Unisys data center. So if you have a new supplier, then we're going to have to spend money to physically make use of someone else's machines in another data center, et cetera. So you will have transition costs for that. And then obviously a different operating cost going forward. We also are looking to bring the desk side support, which is the people you see come around and work on PCs and laptops, et cetera, as well as the service desk, the help desk function, that we're bringing in-house. And so that will, there'll be obviously dollars spent on staff, space, et cetera, to support that effort.
Okay, and for the stuff that we're going to bring back in-house, what's the anticipated number of employees that we might be hiring new, or do we have the capabilities already within IT?
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Yang, 33 staff is being proposed.
Okay, and is that included in the transition costs? Or is that a completely new expenditure?
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Yang, it's a combination. And there's obviously some transition cost, but it's going to be primarily operating cost going forward after we hire people, et cetera. But there are some transition costs because, again, that's being supported through Unisys, through a Utah facility that we make use of today. So it'll be a combination.
Okay, and would that be for 2015, or would the costs come to us in 2016?
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Yang, no, the costs will start in 2015 because I most definitely would not want to just have everything come up January 1st of 2016. That would be a very challenging thing to do. So we're going to need to get those people on board, get them established, get things set up in advance, just like we're going to have to do with everything else that transitions. And so that's why we'll be spending money in 2015. And any money that's spent in 2015 will be considered transition costs. And then obviously anything beyond starting January 1st of 16 will be operating.
Okay, and let me just kind of get this straight. So the IT outsourcing transition cost, I mean, includes, several things, including this bringing or hiring new employees. And I mean, we have an estimated $2.7 million, but I mean, that might not be the number. I mean, it might be a larger number than that. And I'm just wondering, I mean, does IT have that within their budget? I guess, and if it does, I mean, I'm wondering where the line item is for that, or if you can point me to the right direction, that'd be great.
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Yang. No, it's not structured in our budget. There are means that the city has for managing finances. When things take place outside of our budgeted areas, there are mechanisms the city uses and funding sources for us to be able to handle those sorts of things. Finance would be the best organization to talk about the mechanics behind that. And that's who we rely on to ensure that, in essence, we can be made whole.
Okay, and last question, if and when this happens, will the transition be fairly seamless?
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Yang, yes. Or somebody's going to come looking for me. No, our intent, I mean, if you knew how much changes every day, every month, I mean, change management is a big deal for us because things have to change. Things get upgraded. There are security fixes that have to get up. We live and die by our ability to hopefully change and improve your world without you seeing an impact of that. And so that's our intent. And that's one reason why transition will start early on in 2015 and take all year for us to accomplish it so that we ensure that we have a seamless, smooth transition. My goal and what I tell my folks is, look, IT has to be like a light switch. You know how to turn it on. When you flip the switch, it always comes on. And heaven forbid if it doesn't, we get it fixed rapidly. But most definitely, it's something that everybody relies on, and it just has to be there. And so we're taking great pains to ensure the transition is smooth.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Gordon and Councilmember Johnson in queue. I just wanted to see if Ms. Christensen, if you could maybe augment any of Mr. Dahl's remarks. When he mentioned finance department, you might need to be able to respond.
Thank you, Chair Quincy. As Mr. Dahl alluded to, we have been working with the IT department in quantifying the costs associated with this transition. It's not fully fleshed out at this point due to the continued negotiations with whatever vendor we end up going with, which may play into the ongoing costs that we would incur with any changes in the operations with the department. However, given the balances within the intergovernmental service fund, we would anticipate that much of any of the transition costs would be associated with the resources that we have accumulated over the last several years in anticipation of this transition.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And I was looking at page 31, which compared the 2014 adopted budget with the recommended budget. And I don't know if we can get that slide up for us, but that might be handy.
Go back to.
And it looks like we're taking some general fund expenses. Okay, maybe it says 31 in mine, but it's actually not that. It's a. It looks like this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. The numbering's a little different in our hard copies. So it looks like there's some general fund money in 2014 that's all zeroed out in 2015, and it's been somehow moved into the internal service fund. And it makes me curious a little bit about the rate model. And I've been here for a while, and when I first got here, I heard a lot of complaints about the rate model and how expensive it was to pay for IT services in the departments and how it was being, managed and set and what that meant and the sometimes the burden that it seemed to place on folks. I have to tell you, I haven't heard that in recent years. I don't know whether everybody's just accepted it or not, but it looks like we're going to be transferring some of the costs over to the internal service fund, and that makes me wonder, is the rate model changing? Are we going to, our department's going to have to be paying more for these services? Do you have a handy thumbnail way of explaining the rate model to council members that we could understand and the public could?
Mr. Dahl, I think that might be a question that might be best addressed by Ms. Christensen, if that's appropriate.
Thank you, Chair Quincy. Councilmember Gordon, you are correct in that we have universally across the enterprise relooked at all of the internal service charges amongst the various departments. Mr. Dahl had indicated earlier that the budget that they've got that reflects all non-general fund funding is indeed about 78% originating from the general fund. And given that the services provided by the what we'll call the internal service departments are going to happen whether or not they're charged out to the individual departments, and knowing that the enterprise really is all funded from the same place, the budgeting process in the last couple of years has been evolving to provide for sufficient funding automatically in any of the individual departments for the internal service charges, knowing that they're not particularly flexible in the amounts of costs that are allocated to the individual departments. So we've provided at the beginning of the budget process 100% of the resources necessary for them to cover their internal service charges, and then rely on the department to be flexible with their budget in their discretionary charges. So that in large part would explain why you haven't heard a lot of concern necessarily about departments being adversely impacted by fluctuations or increases in the internal service charges. And I also would like to assist in the question regarding the general fund reduction from 2014 to 15. The 2014 adopted budget did include one-time resources from the general fund to provide for some transition cost assistance within the IT department. My sense is that not all of that has been utilized in 2014. They may be seeking to utilize those resources in 15. However, there was not an intention with the original implementation of those funds to have it be ongoing.
So could I just follow up? Is there a way that you can explain then what is the rate model for IT for departments? How do you figure out the cost, what it will cost, even for the city council? Do we look at the number of employees, and then do we put an amount on that? Do we look at the number of pieces of equipment, and do we have a charge based on that? How do we make sure that that's somehow fair, or do we actually look at what IT services they use and do some kind of audit at the end of last year and say, you were demanding so much from IT, we have to charge more next year? How do we set the rate model, and is there a handy way to explain that to people?
The short answer to that question is yes, because all of those factors are considered in the overall allocation of the costs. There are certain costs associated with the individual pieces of equipment that are deployed in the departments. There are also costs allocated dependent on the type of software that, if it's being used individually by one department, that department will receive a more appropriate charge for their specific use of that software. Enterprise-wide software is spread generally on FTE. So there are really about 3 different factors that are taken into consideration for the various components of the IT department. So from the initiation of the service charges, what happens is a thorough review of the operational costs associated with IT, and then it's broken down into those various components, including what are the equipment charges, what are the additional costs associated with services that were selected by the department, say an additional PC added to their function. At the same time, we're also looking at what departments are using any department-specific software, and the maintenance costs associated with that will be allocated very closely into that one individual department, and then the overall infrastructure is spread evenly throughout the organization.
Just to follow up, so is there a mathematical equation? I mean, that almost sounds like there may be a algorithm or something that everything can be plugged into, or is that an individual analysis of each department and then a conclusion is reached? The piece that seems so unique is what software and applications each department has.
It's really incorporates all of that. There is the different factors that play into how the various costs are allocated. So the IT budget is essentially split into those various functions, and then they're allocated with, and Mr. Paulson would, I think, nod to this, that very large spreadsheet with an allocation methodology that we plug the actual costs into, and that's updated on an annual basis depending on the deployment of equipment as well as staff.
Just to follow up, so if a department was interested in trying to manage their IT costs better, they could request the spreadsheet and they could look at some of the services or applications they're using and reevaluate and say, is this really worth it to us or not? Is that correct?
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Gordon, they potentially could do that, but in large part they would have no reason to do that because they're receiving 100% of the funding that's necessary to cover those costs. Again, the services provided by the IT department are evaluated in the aggregate and at the enterprise level. We're trying to prevent the need for departments to nickel and dime their individual budget in terms of receiving IT support when organizationally we know that they need it. We provide the resources for them to access it and then have them focus their energy on their operations, not necessarily the twice removed support of their operations.
And I think that does make total sense, although that might also open the doorway for some unnecessary, luxurious so does that mean that we could get our computers back in the council chambers and it wouldn't cost the city council or the clerk's office anything? For example, I mean, there used to be computers made available to the Charter Commission and Zoning and Planning Commission that were just in here. Now we bring our office computers into the chambers, and so that's a specific example. We took that measure because we realized we could save thousands and thousands of dollars by not having duplicate rental fees to Unisys. So that would be my one concern. I know the nickel and diming was really a problem, and I agree. I like this solution, but now I'm wondering, does that mean people will have a tendency to say they need more than they really need? Are there some checks and balances there?
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Gordon, Mr. Dahl and his team are the checks and balances in determining whether or not it's appropriate deployment of equipment. There are regular check-ins regarding the status of the budget, and again, there are no allocations of additional resources that occur without a conversation and generally an approval process through Ways and Means and the budget process. So it would be very difficult for any individual department to go crazy in terms of their IT spending without it being brought through the gatekeeper of the IT department.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question. Since some folks had raised questions about outsourcing transition costs, would you say over, Mr. Dahl, the life of the expected contract that we have, that we are, once you factor these outsourcing transition costs, expecting to save more money than we are spending today on our services that are being outsourced and also have a higher quality of service?
Chairman Quincy and Councilmember Johnson, most definitely we are going to save money and we are going to have a better set of services when we're done.
Great, thank you.
That sounds like a pretty good last word. Thank you very much, Mr. Dahl, for your presentation. And I think we can transition pretty quickly. Mr. Tetzel is here from our audit department. I think you are the audit department at this point. But thank you, Mr. Carl, for assisting this presentation. Oh, Mr. Tetzel, I'm sorry. If you're ready, we are. Thank you.
Good morning.
joining
I'm
us.
Will Tetzel, here to present the budget for the 2015 Internal Audit Department. Fairly straightforward here. I think the budget was increased by a couple percentage points, and maybe Sandy Christensen can discuss that, and then I'll talk about what we're up to for the coming year.
Make sure you're speaking straight ahead into the microphone without adjusting them, if you can. It's difficult to hear from back here. Please go ahead.
Sandy, do you mind?
Absolutely. Chair Quincy, members of the Budget Subcommittee, as Mr. Tetzel indicated, there's a slight increase in the 2015 recommended budget for the internal audit function. It's approximately 3.2%. There were no additional enhancements incorporated into the budget recommendation. Rather, in anticipation of Mr. Tetzel coming on board, allow him to manage his budget as it's provided and to continue to evolve the function of the internal audit. Right now, there are 2 vacant positions. There's a provision for the director position as well as 2 audit positions is maintained in the 2015 budget. So basically, we've got an inflationary increase and maintenance of current service levels.
Thank you. And this will briefly show you the org chart. I report to the audit committee and administratively to the city coordinator. And there's the 2 vacant positions that we're working on filling here soon. Within the budget, I'd just like to talk about what the internal audit department is working on for 2015. And we're currently budgeted for 3 full-time positions. Mine was filled, the director position, in late October, just recently. And the goals for audit for 2015 are to identify and assess systemic risk and risk themes from a top-down approach within the city, develop an audit plan that addresses the city's top risks, provide value-added risk and control advisory services to city and department leaders, and to remain available to conduct or assist with emerging issues. As was mentioned, there weren't any enhancements to the budget this year, but I'd like to just talk a little bit about what went on before I came on board. So the internal audit department was recrafted this year by the audit committee working group, and that consisted of Council President Johnson, Council Vice President Glidden, Council Member Paul Masano, who is also the chair of the audit committee, Council Member Quincy, and Council Member Cano, and I think there was representation from the mayor's office as well. Right now, internal audit is working to establish our mission, scope, and approach for this renewed department. And next steps are filling these vacant positions and executing against the plan that we create this year. Goals and values are a little bit unique from an audit perspective because audit shouldn't typically directly impact what the city does and how they do it, yet advise or assess the efficiency and effectiveness and how well risks are managed in those areas. But I did call out a couple points here that I think are maybe stronger correlations than others, and that one's living well. So safety and compliance to certain regulations, especially those around safety, are obviously a high risk to the city. A hub of economic activity and innovation, and how the city collaborates with partners within the city, establishments, not-for-profits, and other organizations that are either funded directly or indirectly by the city. And a city that works, so city government that runs well and connects to the community it serves. I think that one's very direct. From a values perspective, I think they're all there. I checked off safety and growth, but health, equity, vitality, connectedness, they're all I want to say dotted lines, but maybe a little bit blurred from a department that directly works with the city or provides services to residents or businesses within the city. With that, I will open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right. As you were looking at the goals and values, audit has a unique role within the city. It's an oversight role, but it's also a management role, and it's a consultative role. So appreciate you saying really you could check all of those things, because you're really helping make sure that the city council and all of our departments are performing those. I'd just like to give Councilmember Palmisano, whether she wants to or not, an opportunity to comment. But before that, Councilmember Yang is in queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Best presentation so far. It was quick. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for helping us with this. Really appreciate it.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Well, I can't follow that, Mr. Chair.
Although you should.
I just wanted to thank my colleagues for their patience through this. It was almost a year-long process, but I think we're on the right track. I see Mr. Tetzel making very deliberate moves into building relationships across the enterprise, and I'm pleased, and I know that our audit committee is reinvigorated and excited to have him. That he got a little bit thrown into this, and I need to apologize for any miscommunication about that. But it's a pretty straightforward budget. What I am asking my colleagues to do is to give this next year before we would even consider making any changes to this kind of budget proposal.
Good. So. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Tetzel. Well done, and thank you very much for coming in on short notice. It's probably my fault that we didn't communicate that as well, but you certainly look prepared and we're ready to go. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Appreciate it.
The final budget hearing, I believe, is from the mayor's office, and I'm sure that the Chief of Staff, Mr. Stiles, will be joining us quickly. So I will just hold off for a few minutes until the mayor's office is available. Welcome, Mr. Stiles. Thank you for joining us. I apologize for the confusion over times, but you're being flexible, so I appreciate your availability.
Thank you very much for having me today. How do I move the slides forward here? Page down, terrific. Great, thank you very much, Chair Quincy and council members, for having me here today. I'll walk very quickly through the mayor's recommended budget for her office. We, like the city council, our role in the mayor's office is to partner with the city council in providing leadership toward reaching our 5-year goals, which you see on this slide. Our business lines are similar to those of the City Council. We share responsibility with the City Council for leading and supporting policy from beginning to end that is designed to achieve our goals. This includes policy development, promotion, implementation, and oversight throughout the enterprise, and also working with the City Council to leverage partnerships throughout the city and region to meet our goals. I think you're familiar with the staff in our office. This is our current staffing model. As you might expect, with a new administration, new policymakers, and new goals, we've developed a somewhat different staffing model to meet those goals than the one in the previous mayor's office. We consolidated some previously existing positions and repurposed others. On page F185 of your budget book, there's an org chart which is out of date. So that reflects the one in Mayor Ryback's office, but not the one in Mayor Hodges' office. To implement our shared policy goals, the mayor is recommending an additional $195,000 in the general fund allocation to her office, which of course includes her herself. This enhancement is to fund staff positions that already exist in our office. About half that amount is to cover one FTE that is already hired. We discussed with the city council earlier this year about how best to fund this position, and you recommended that we come back through the 2015 budget process, and so we are following your direction. And the other half of that enhancement is to cover the costs of paying our staff at different pre-existing steps than ones that the previous staff was paid for in the previous mayor's office. Mayor respectfully requests that the council adopt her proposed office budget as an investment in our share goals, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stiles. Are there any questions? Not seeing any. Oh, I've seen, there's one. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Stiles, I wasn't here in 2013 or before, but in terms of FTEs for a mayoral office, I mean, what's been the average number of people in the mayoral office?
I think the average has been, including the mayor, has been, I think that it's been 11, but I think that if you go back into some of the previous administrations, it was higher than that. So I think that there were cuts that the mayor's office took sometime in the previous decade. I think at one point they were up to 13, and so then in more recent years it was down to 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Not seeing any further questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Stiles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members.
Thank you. I think this concludes our scheduled budget hearings. I'd just like to remind folks that at the conclusion of Monday's Ways and Means Committee, we will be having an opportunity for some follow-up questions from some open items for the previous 8 weeks of budget hearings. That Ms. Christensen will lead us through addressing some of those follow-up items. This gives us an additional few days over the weekend to get those questions to Ms. Christensen, and we'll see if we can wrap up the year and as we get ready for the markup season. So thank you very much for everybody's attendance and participation, and we'll see you on Monday.